Architecture of structures can hold many meanings, from Rome's big monumental temples to detailed Japan gypsas. Form in the craftsmanship, plan, and choice of material can reveal a lot about the civilization. This idea is especially visible in the period when Roman architectural forms were reinterpreted and reshaped as they were used by the Christians in different ways. In this video, we will argue that the early Christians intentionally used Roman architecture to convey authority and order, and will explain it through St. Peter's Basilica and St. John lateral examples. They manipulated the meaning of these forms for their worship and rituals, which influenced the development of Christian identity in ideological, theological, and political ways.
Built forms cannot be neutral. They shape behavior and embody the ideology they are formed in. They're built to convey ideas, like showing where someone belongs to, what they believe in, their identity. Now, we will argue that forms of Roman structures carried meaning, and early Christians used these forms and meanings to develop their own beliefs. To accurately analyze the interpretations, we must understand the initial meaning. Roman architecture was a material representation of their social and political system. It showed imperial power, urban ideology, and their identity in a collective manner. Forms, basilicas, and temples with their strong columns, large openings, and grand stairs leading the way were a show of power. For example, a person entering these structures would feel small, which can be interpreted as Romans turning their holy political dominance to a visible display, which is an active way of creating Romanistas. Learned behaviors, hierarchies, and norms created from social gatherings, shops, rituals, public assemblies, and even daily routines created Roman identity.
Christians actively reshaped Roman architectural language to express authority, new forms, and Christian identity. A very influential example of this is the St. Peter's Basilica, and the way it has transformed over the years. Even before Constantine changed anything, Peter's tomb was framed using Roman forms. The small aedicula from the 2nd century, placed above his grave, was following rules of Roman memorial shrines. However, Christians started to transform the meaning of the place by treating it not as a family monument, but as a sacred place of apostolic presence. Similarly, the trickley at the Via Appia, which is covered in graffiti about Peter and Paul, later was turned to a Roman burial place by Christians. These examples prove that Christians did not reject Roman forms, but built upon them, or reassigned meanings according to their symbols or functions. This converted Roman forms into spaces that hold Christian identity. Constantine's choice, while transforming the site into a monumental basilica, was not a coincidence, and can be used as an example of how Roman forms created the narrative of power and importance of Christian identity. By choosing the basilica, a Roman civic building for law and imperial rule, Constantine did not have to create a Christian identity from scratch, but had the opportunity to use the foundations of a powerful monumentalization idea and Roman order. Romans had laws about burial sites, but Constantine still intentionally chose to build the basilica over Peter's tomb, to use the symbolism it will carry for Christianity. The altar is directly above the tomb, but not only that, it is at the end of the axial plan of the basilica. These details intensify the symbolism, highlight how spatial design can create theological arguments and express underlying meanings. Christian identity has been expressed through Roman form and existing societal structures. Beyond the large-scale spatial strategies that we have explained, there are also symbolic power of building parts used by early Christians in a smaller scale that turn architectural elements into Christian ideology carriers. For example, columns had a language of representation, memory, and power. Before Christian basilicas, stones and pillars could represent figures. Afterwards, by shaping these figures onto the columns, Christians made these columns have a representation of divinity rather than the divine itself, thus making them carry further symbolic meaning like the dead, honored, or divine. So with Christianity, these were reactivated, and columns lining the nave became apostolic figures, church structures, or sacred continuity markers. The meaning extended to other supports, such as the keystone. which holds an ark stable. It became a metaphor for Christ. Early Christian writers said that Christ was a headstone that joins walls and lifts believers into God's structure. Christ is the keystone that holds the identity and community together, protecting them from falling apart. Christians gave Roman forms new meanings, turning architecture into an ideology language. They used structural parts to share theological truths, group identity, and sacred order.
Constantine and the early Christians created a cohesive Christian identity based on the symbolic power of Roman civic architecture. They combined political and religious authority through Roman architectural forms. This is evident in Constantine's intent of constructing the first basilica intended for Christian worship, Lateran Basilica, later known as St. John Lateral, which was turned into a Catholic cathedral. It was political at that time. He was referring to his victory at Milvian Bridge when he was challenging Maxentius for power in the Western Empire as a divine sign. Therefore, supporting his role religiously and creating a hybrid Roman Christian identity served his agenda, as this union would later support him as emperor. Lateran's design directly represents the Roman law court of Basilica. Christians transformed the power of the administration, shown in the well-known Roman law court plan of the Basilica, into the religious power of God. This plan type had served a representation of civic authority and power over the years. Therefore, early Christians keeping this familiar Roman type didn't just mean reusing an existing layout, but taking on the ideological significance that came with it. Furthermore, the long nave, open interior, and lavish decorations done by Constantine served to unite various Christian groups. In this way, the design reinforced both the new alliance between Constantine, the Christian community, and the bishop's authority. Subsequently, the plan didn't just change, however the uses of space and the meaning it carried did. The prime example is changing the function of the most significant feature, the apse. In the Roman law court basilica, the apse served as tribunal, a raised seat for the magistrate who represented civic judgment and imperial power. After the Christians adapted, they created the same tribunal space for the bishop. The center of Roman judicial power became the center of Christian authority. They placed the bishop where Roman judge once sat. This way, the early church moved Roman order, hierarchy, and governance into the Christian ideology. Eventually, this meaning grew into identifying the apse as the head of Christ. In this way, the Lateran shows how Christians intentionally reshaped Roman architectural symbols, keeping their authoritative associations while redefining them for worship, hierarchy, and the building of the new Christian's identity. The reinterpretations of Roman forms was not limited to symbolic authority. It also responded directly to the ritual needs of early Christian worship. Therefore, this part of the video will work as a counter-argument and claim early Christians used such structures because they needed fitting structures for their worship, not because they wanted to use the meaning of Roman connections. Churches have developed as gathering places based on the requirements of liturgy, as well as the ceremonial function of various spaces within them. This has resulted in a variety of structural forms. Spaces where speech could be heard clearly and where large groups could participate were necessary for Christian worship, like preaching, group prayers, and singing. Instead of being a symbolic appropriation of Roman authority, the basilica's architectural form provided different sound system and a bigger gathering place, unlike the small domuses they used to gather. The small domus quick reverberation times, which meant sound had to go through a smaller number of meters per second for someone to hear it, resulting in clear speech. However, with larger basilicas, Christianity gained an official status, longer reverberation time. As a result, the liturgy evolved from straightforward spoken preaching to songs, sacred chants, creating stronger, heavenly, and powerful religious experience, thanks to the architectural conditions of the basilicas. To conclude, Earlier Christians used basilicas because they needed bigger and better sound quality structures for their worship. However, this said, there is substantial evidence showing that the usage of spolia, manipulating the plan of the structure, reinterpreted architectural forms like the apse or the keystone into religious symbols, has played a role in political propaganda and a new Christian identity.
The rise of Christian identity in post-imperial Europe involved reinterpreting rather than rejecting Roman architecture by adapting basilicas, memorial designs, and symbolic items like columns. Early Christians put their beliefs into structures linked to authority and social structure. This let them assert a link to Rome as they changed its architectural style to show new theological meanings and ranking. Through actions like aligning Peter's tomb in St. Peter's Basilica or redefining the tribunal in the Lateran, Christians used common Roman designs to show unity, order, and sacred power. In doing so, they made a physical space that shaped and secured a new Christian identity.